Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well. Wanted to record this video to go over some of the polls that have come out. I'm gonna divide this up probably into two videos because I thought that there were some really interesting things that came out this past week. Um, first regarding Andrew Cuomo and some Democratic state level politicians in New York, and then I think the second one's going to be with regards to some polls that have come out recently with regards to the Biden administration as well as former President Trump. But first, for this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about this, interesting article that came out from Politico earlier this week. Cuomo stares down the third-term curse. So yeah, last weekend they came out with this article from Politico. Really interesting read. I would recommend you guys take a look at it if you're interested. Basically, that there is a tendency for very popular New York governors to make it to their third term and decide to run again for reelection and often not have that work out very well for them. With, I believe, Nelson Rockefeller being the only one to successfully serve for 4 consecutive terms. Now, Andrew Cuomo, of course, is the Democratic governor of New York. He has done, he's been in the news lately because of this nursing home scandal, where allegations are that he potentially covered up, or maybe if not covered up, at least did not properly disclose the correct number of nursing home deaths during the first months of the COVID crisis in New York State. I won't really be talking much about the scandal itself. I want to talk about more about the polling and political implications of it, but there's definitely plenty of objective news and facts out there for anyone who is interested in reading it. So this Marist poll came out yesterday that was pretty interesting. It suggests that potentially Andrew Cuomo, along with other Democratic politicians in the state, Chuck Schumer and Kristen Gillibrand at the Senate, could potentially be in some level of trouble come 2022 and in future elections. So you can see here, there's a pretty decent margin between people saying that he did something either illegal or unethical, about 60% total, and those saying that Cuomo did nothing wrong, 27%. Talking about a negative 33% margin there. It's tough to say like how much of an impact this will actually take, in terms of an election, given how democratic New York State is. But you see that in terms of the poll numbers and the general trends aren't great. I mean, his numbers have kind of like leveled out, around 55, 44% with regards to him being a good leader, and split on whether or not he represents all of New York State. But it's still not great news when you go and take a little bit of a deeper look at the crosstabs here. We can see among registered voters, he has a 48 to 45% approval rating among registered voters, a net margin of 3. That's on a, generally speaking, especially in the era of Donald Trump, that's not a terrible approval rating for an incumbent to have, but it is pretty bad for someone who has enjoyed extremely high levels of popularity throughout the COVID crisis. And for that matter, a state where, according to this poll, 51% of voters are registered as Democrats. You see this kind of like when you look down at the, to be honest, I'm a little surprised that there is, not a wider gap between Democrats and Republicans here. But, when you only have like 64% approval among Democrats to 28% disapproving, I would say that potentially open, especially in this day and age where we're so polarized as a nation in terms of our politics and media, I would say that, these numbers should be higher for Democrats. And, that potentially means that he is maybe open to a primary challenge of sorts. Granted, still vast majority of Democrats approve, but, potentially opens up the route for a primary challenge, I would say. And just the general stigma of the scandal could make it a little bit more of a favorable environment for someone like AOC to jump in 2022 and see how she does on the gubernatorial level. And so anyways, that's about it. This poll here from Marist is pretty solid poll. I think they do a good job. And I definitely enjoyed reading through them back during the 2020 election cycle. And you can see here in the crosstabs, basically, like, when you look from last summer, he went from a 66 to 29%. So what is that, 37 net margin to a 5-point net margin in terms of approval. Again, still probably good enough to win re-election in New York, but could be better. Now, I just want to bring up here Chuck Schumer here, just because I think it's also interesting that you actually here have he's underwater in terms of approval, where we're talking 41% to about 52%, a net 11-point margin, down from about, I guess the last time Marist did a poll a little over 2 years ago, a negative 4-point margin. So again, it's common for senators, even in like a heavily Democratic state, to potentially have underwater approval ratings. However, I would say that for someone like Schumer, who, again, with like AOC, potentially rumors of her exploring a primary challenge, you look at these crosstabs here and you see 57% approval from Democrats against, basically 35% for fair or poor. Again, they've probably come home. Schumer would definitely be the favorite in a primary scenario. However, I would say that a net, what would that be? A net 23% margin or so, that 22% margin by your own party is not the best spot to be in when you have a potentially competitive primary coming up a year from now. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight Kristen Gillibrand. She ran for president back in 2020 and didn't work out great for her. And her numbers are arguably, they're a little bit less polarizing in a way, right? Like she's much less well known among New York voters. But the numbers aren't great. When we look at this divide, we're talking 36 to 45%, again, underwater by negative 9 points. And, again, this poll has tended to show her historically not doing terribly great in the polls. However, again, keeping an eye out for 2024, who knows? Maybe it opens up some sort of path for a primary challenge. So anyways, just wanted to end here just to show quickly the strength that someone like Cuomo has had, in his elections. As you can see here, he has never won re-election by less than a 14-point margin. Most recently, he won by a little over 23 points in 2018. So he is definitely the heavy favorite going into 2022. And then same thing with Chuck Schumer in his latest election back in 2016. He won re-election by what would that be? A 43-point margin, which is huge, even in a heavily Democratic state like New York. Things of course can change, but I wouldn't say they're terribly likely. And then same thing we can see here with Kristen Gillibrand. She won her re-election back in 2018 by 34 points. So New York, obviously heavily Democratic. No real chance, I would say, at least at this day and age, that one of these politicians, Schumer, Gillibrand, Cuomo, would be unseated by a Republican challenger. However, you never know. Politics can be unpredictable at times, and with the right conditions, maybe you have the and the same thing on the primaries, right? Like sometimes you can have the right conditions, a wave year for the opposition party, the right Republican candidate, the wrong Democratic candidate, and then all of those factors kind of build up so that you have an election like in 2010 for Senate in Illinois or Massachusetts, where heavily Democratic states ended up voting narrowly for Republican candidates. It's not going to happen, I would say, even 95% of the time. But, in politics in 2016 should have taught us something, that kind of anything is possible, for better or worse. And with that, I just wanted to end on, again, like Trump lost by solid margins in New York, roughly 23 points. Still won't be competitive on a presidential level, most likely for a while. But I did think it was interesting to end on this note, on the, Andrew Cuomo's father, Mario Cuomo. As you can see here, he was very popular. And this is back in the day, in the age where, New York is is now like more of a Democratic state. However, it still has some level of, legacy Republicanism, I guess, if you want to call it that, lingering over from, the Nelson Rockefeller type of days. And, you see here, he's very popular. He wins his first reelection, his second reelection by a decent margin. He wins his first race narrowly, but then for his second term, wins by a solid margin. And again, in 1990, the conservative candidate kind of splits the vote between the Republican. But even when you add in those two separate votes, he would have won by roughly a 12-point margin. So still pretty good. Then all of a sudden in 1994, he runs for his fourth term and loses by, reasonably, 3.3 point margin, close. But, we would say that's like a solid victory for the Republican candidate, which, potentially gives us some sort of warning sign if these trends continue for 2022 and Cuomo does decide to run again. It's really tough to say what's going to happen, but I do think that this, page here on Wikipedia does give us like a quick reminder that politics can be very volatile and unpredictable at times. And the presumed favorites, even, a year and a half before the election, can rapidly change once the election's held. So anyways, just wanted to end on that note. I'm going to make the next video regarding some more Trump-Biden type of polls that have come out this week. And yeah, that'll be it. Thanks again for watching. Please feel free to leave any suggestions or comments, and hope you have a great day. Bye.